name is Judy Ziss. I'm chair of the Legislative Committee of the League of Women Voters of Falmouth. And on behalf of the Falmouth League, I welcome everyone here. It's nice to see real people in real chairs at a program. And I also welcome everyone who is watching on a screen. And because of that, we have FCTV to thank. So we thank FCTV for filming this. As many of you know, and most of you have heard, the League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization. We are political because we take stands on public policy issues, but only after study, discussion, and reaching a group consensus. We encourage informed and active participation in government. We work to increase understanding of major public policy issues. And we influence policy through education and through advocacy. And we're hoping that we do a little bit of both here today. We have a program that's really two parts. In the first part of our program, we focus on the Common Start Bill, which is a bill to provide financial support for child care and for early education. The second part of the program will not be quite as focused, although we will emphasize affordable housing. For each segment of our program, we will have a speaker. Two of our speakers are sitting over there. Sandy is going to be the speaker in the first part and Liz in the second part. We will have our legislators each talk a little bit, and then we will have a question and answer session. So there'll be two question and answer sessions, and the first one will be limited to Common Start. So let's get started. It's my pleasure to introduce my friend, Dr. Sandra Feynman Silva. She is a Common Start coordinator, and I think she's known in Falmouth as being an advocate on a lot of issues, and right now Common Start is one of them. So Sandy, the floor is yours. I didn't change this, so let's get this. Is that the first one?
Good evening, folks. Thank you so much for coming out this evening. Please bear with me. I'm pretty exhausted, actually, I have to admit. Been a long, crazy day, as usual. But I'm Sandy Feynman Silva, and I am active in the Common Start campaign for affordable, accessible, high-quality early education and child care in Massachusetts. And we have been in existence for probably 5 years. A year before the last legislative session, people were hammering out some of the principles of our campaign, what was needed to solve the early education and child care crisis. And then in the last legislative session, 2 bills were filed, one in the House, one in the Senate, called the Common Start bills, which have now evolved into early education and care bills, which were filed because the legislation did not pass during the last legislative session. It was refiled this January. So again, the Common Start Coalition is a group of organizations, providers, parents, allies, and advocates, again, working together to make high-quality early education and child care affordable and accessible to all Massachusetts families. It's a big task, but certainly the pandemic really brought into sharp focus the crisis in early education and care. Whoops, let's see if I'm going, all right. And what are the issues that we are trying to implement? As I mentioned, the pandemic brought these issues into sharp focus, but they have long predated 2020. But tens of thousands of parents and caregivers, mostly women, have left the workforce because they could not find affordable or accessible early education and care. Many child care providers had to close their doors, particularly during the pandemic and subsequent to the pandemic, again, because families couldn't afford child care and they could not pay their bills as parents kept their children home. Early educator early educators are very poorly paid. Many of them are eligible for food stamps and other public assistance benefits because wages are so low. And people are reluctant to enter this profession because it is unsustainable in terms of the income deficit. Employers across the state are also suffering, again, because the individuals who work for them cannot find affordable childcare. In Massachusetts, early education or care for an infant is typically almost $20,000 a year. If you have an infant and a toddler, you're talking about a bill that can be up to $35,000 a year for 2 children. These are absolutely unaffordable, and families, again, one family member stays home to care for the children, even though that person would like to work, and it's typically a woman in a two-parent heterosexual family. The Common Start Coalition, again, is committed to solving these problems. Whoops, I gotta remember which direction. The Common Start bills have been filed, one in the House and one in the Senate. They are about 85 or 90% of the language of these 2 bills is identical. There are some slight differences. But the legislative framework that's reflected in both bills would provide the structure that would solve this crisis. There would be affordable care options for families, and we'll talk about those in a minute. There would be significantly better pay and benefits for early educators and child care providers. There would be a new and stable source of funding for the facilities themselves, which simply cannot balance their books based on what families that send their children can afford to pay. High quality programs and services for children would be available in places that currently may not even have available childcare. For example, the Lower and Outer Cape is a virtual, what we would call a childcare desert for infant care, because it's so expensive and the providers cannot afford to run a facility relying on infants. And again, there would be substantial relief for businesses that cannot find laborers because of the child care crisis. Whoopsie. Now, how do the bills actually come to allow the solution to come to fruition? Under the bills, we would have what is called a mixed delivery system, which is currently what early education and care relies on. Some children go to homes, private homes for family child care. Others go to centers or facilities outside the home. And this mixed delivery system would continue the same settings that families now are accustomed to and want and rely on. The bill would meet the needs for children from 0 to 5, which is the typical age for infant and child care, but it would, to age 5, it would also provide after school and out of school care for children when working families need it most, for example, during school vacations, summers, and evenings, and even weekends. So there will be incentives for facilities to have available care for extended hours and various wraparound services, what we call wraparound services, rides to the child care center, for example, lunch or dinner, special needs care, and so forth. There would also be care for children to age 15 who have special needs. So this is really a holistic solution to the child care crisis that is essential if we want to have a well-functioning economy. We want to have families that can make a living and pay their bills and survive in our communities. The Common Start framework, again, would reduce costs to families and subsidize the facilities themselves. And we'll talk about that in a second. I've done that like 4 times. But the legislative framework that would implement these proposals and that is incorporated into the language of the child care bills currently would use 2 different funding sources coming from local, state, and federal sources. So we're talking about using tax dollars and other sources of funding to help pay for early education and care, just as we pay for public school, K through 12 care, education for our children, because early education and care is such an essential component in the lives of infants and children. It must be supported and subsidized adequately. So one part of the subsidies would be called operational funding. They would directly offset provider operating costs for including early educator pay. So this would go toward improving the facility, upgrades, new technologies, new equipment for early education and care, and all of the costs of running a child care program, either a family-based or a center-based program. The second funding stream would be the family financial assistance component. And these would be direct-to-family grants to subsidize the cost. And financial assistance would prioritize in the first phase earnings at or below 85% of state median income, and I have the amounts shown on the screen. And as more funding becomes available over, we would hope, a 5-year period, families more in the middle class would be brought into the subsidy system. So these are the operational funding and the family financial assistance components. Some of these are already being implemented in the new funding that the legislature did appropriate in the last cycle, which we may hear about later. Let me see. So again, just to conclude, this is the sort of a sketch of the benefits that families would receive. I do have copies of this little slide. And again, it helps to make early education and child care more affordable and accessible. It addresses better pay and professional development for early educators and child care providers. It helps to build a stronger economy, promotes racial and gender equity in not only in the funding, but in access to early education and care for families and children themselves. It provides what we call the wraparound services, looking at the whole child and the whole family's needs. It makes staffing of early education and care centers more stable, and it promotes high quality early education and care where professional development is enhancing the delivery by the providers and their staff. And it, again, stabilizes funding, which is so essential to ensuring that early education and care as a system in the Commonwealth is reliable, accessible, and affordable for the families that need it. Now, if you want to learn a little more about the Common Start Coalition and our campaign, please go to our website, commonstartma.org, and we ask you to join the campaign. We have over 150 organizations that have signed on as sponsoring organizations, including many on the Cape and Islands, and we have individuals, allies, and supporters who are helping us to spread the word about this very important legislative endeavor. We also ask people to share a story about your child care experience. I even shared one myself about my son that I had 50 years ago and the crisis I was in as a single parent trying to raise a 1-year-old and work full-time and pay for child care. This has been going on for a long time. I ask your, again, ask your legislators to co-sponsor the bills, our Cape delegation, all the Democrats, and David Vieira has also signed on as a co-sponsor, so we're very proud of that. State Senator Sue Moran is a co-lead sponsor on the Senate side of the early education and care legislation. And participate in events that we have. We're having a State House Lobby Day on March 22nd, and we invite you to attend. I am going to drive to Boston. Getting back home is going to be tough, but we'll find a way. But I hope that you will take some of our literature and support us. Thank you very much.
Sandy, thank you very, very much. I want to say it's a colorful presentation because I saw that that very colorful slide, the one a couple of, I guess, a third from the end, when I attended one of these programs on Common Start, and it sort of struck me as being very, very special. I also want to say the League of Women Voters, the Massachusetts League of Women Voters supports Common Start, and our 3 legislators sitting there all support Common Start, and I think we should applaud that because that's just wonderful to know. Now, what we're going to do now, I'm going to introduce our 3 legislators. I think you know them. I'm just going to say their names and they can say hello. And then we'll have each of them. I think they're going to just stay at the table. We're going to start out with Representative Vieira and then Representative Fernandez and end up with Senator Moran, and they'll each have about 5 minutes to talk about Common Start if they want to spend 5 minutes talking about Common Start. I'm going to start out with Representative Vieira.
Thank you, Judy, and thanks to the League and thanks to the Common Start Coalition, because the Coalition has helped raise the voice around the importance of early education and care. I go back to January of 2011, and I'm sitting in a hearing room in the basement of the State House in what's called the bullpen. And the bullpen is where freshman legislators go until you get an office. And so there's these long folding tables, and all the reps are on one side of the table, and all of the aides are on the other. It's Democrat, Republicans all mixed together, and the lobbyists line up at the door because they know where all the new reps are. And the phone rings, and I answer it, and it's Sean Gonzalez from the Cape Cod Times. And he goes, "I'd like to speak with Representative Vieira." I said, "This is Representative Vieira." He goes, "Oh, you answered the phone." I didn't tell him that my aide was in the restroom, and that's why I was answering the phones, but it was a good first introduction. And he said, "You're a new legislator, and I want to talk about some of your priorities. What are the things that you're going to work on in this session as you start your new journey as a state representative?" And the first thing we talked about was early education and care. And he wrote 3 articles over the course of the first 2 years that I was in Boston. I brought him up for hearings. I brought him up for meetings. When some folks in Boston were talking about early education and care, but many weren't. And over the course of the first 4 years that I was there, when Governor Patrick was governor, the governor started talking about it in the State of the Commonwealth addresses. And that's one of the articles that they wrote. Well, the governor and the Republican Representative Vieira agree on something, early education and care. Maybe there's other things they agree on, and there were other things we agreed on, but that was one of the articles that they wrote. And so over the course of a few years, the Speaker of the House started talking about it. And then the President of the Senate started talking about it, and we've had a number of presidents of the Senate since then who have all been talking about it. And we had a special commission back in 2011-12 on early education and care. Commissioner Weber came in to clean up some problems that you may remember in the system, to find out where was all the money for the wait lists. I was on the education committee at the time, and there were millions and millions of dollars being given back to the general fund at the end of the year, and yet we had wait lists. Well, what happened? There was management issues. And so we reorganized the management issues and got that money out the door. But we never addressed the root causes, which Sandy did so well today, about the workforce. 30% turnover in this workforce. 1 out of 3 childcare workers leave the profession every year. Where do they go? A lot of them go and get the next level of licensure and become public school teachers, where they can get a better salary, they can have better benefits, and they have the support of the institutions that they work for. And so one of the things that we did in this last pandemic era was put together an economic review commission, and Senator Moran served on that commission with me as well. And we came up with a series of recommendations which very much mirror the initiatives that you heard from the Common Start bill. And we were able to start funding some of those initiatives in the last budget, and just now in the supplemental, dealing with the stabilization grants, extending the stabilization grants for the institutions themselves, for the centers, and looking at, if you're trying to run a business and you have to deal with attendance, and you're trying to figure out how to pay all those bills, and a child doesn't come in 2 days that week, okay, how much am I getting for reimbursement this week? How much can I pay next week for supplies, materials? And so what we've done is we've had a paradigm shift from attendance to enrollment. And one of our recommendations is that we continue that, because this was sort of, help stabilize the transition with COVID, but this needs to be part of the system going forward. And we need to look at slots rather than just vouchers, right? Because vouchers, a child can move, the family chooses where they can go, and there is a role for vouchers in mixed delivery system. But we've got to stabilize the institutions, and we need to stabilize the workforce, which gets us to career advancement and career opportunities. Where are young childcare workers going to go next? And how can we talk a lot about STEM, right? We put together these career pathways for engineering and science and all these, but we really have to start looking at mental health workers, childcare workers. We need to have clear pathways in those arenas. Right here in Falmouth, at Falmouth High School, we have an early education and care class. And the young people who graduate from Falmouth High School and complete that class complete with a high school diploma and the entry-level certification to be an EEC worker. And 2 weeks ago, I was in my office with some Head Start advocates, and we were talking about their feeder line and their issues with the workforce. And I said, have you ever tapped the young people coming out of Falmouth High School that might not be going directly to college? They might be looking for employment at the beginning of their career, and they've got the license? And they said, well, actually, we hadn't thought of that. And then one woman in the room goes, I actually know there's a program at another high school near us where I went through that when I was a kid. We need to go back to that high school as well. And so seeing what is already there as potential opportunities for us to tap, and then to be able to stabilize and to increase the salaries. This school district in Falmouth, my alma mater, and Dylan's alma mater, right? We went through this district, and I sat at the Quashnet Elementary School the night that Bob Antonucci and Lincoln DeMora voted to tell Mashpee you have to build a high school because we don't have enough room in this district. And we had gone through a process which ended with a high school renovation to build a school district for 7,000 students. How many students are in Falmouth now? Anybody know? 3,056. We still have all the buildings. We still have the infrastructure. One of the things I think we need to look at is, do we expand the opportunity? Again, mixed delivery system, we're not going to break that down. But if we have a system that can take 7,000 students and we have just over 3,000 students, should we be looking to have public school educators that have those salaries, that have those opportunities, that have those benefits, and give them the wraparound infrastructure within our schools to help go to pre-K 1, pre-K 2, pre-K 3, and to be able to look at grade 10 when our young people have to pass an MCAS and close an achievement gap. Because I've said this since 2001 when I took office, you will never close the achievement gap between kindergarten and 10th grade. It begins between, quite frankly, conception and 5 years old. The trajectory, all the research shows us the trajectory of those young people's lives, not that they can't be changed, but aggregate, statistically, those trajectories are set during those most informative years, and at 5 years old when you go to kindergarten or 6 years old when you go to first grade. You need to be ready to learn. And then by third grade, you need to be able to read so that you can then read to learn, right? And so together, I think we're all on the same page. We probably all have different pieces that we're focusing on, whether it's focusing on a particular bill like Common Start coming in, working with the Education Committee, which will traditionally release its own bill, or also advocating within the line items of the budget to make sure that these programs can continue, the stabilization grants, the rate reserves, so that we can get the salaries up. So we all have a piece to push and move forward. But what I really hope that we do on the Cape, as we see student enrollments going down in every single school district, is to have a real conversation, and Falmouth is starting a conversation about whether or not to do any redistricting in town. And when you redistrict, you look at the buildings. But it's not just about the buildings. It's about the people, it's about the children, and it's about the workforce. And so I look forward to continuing that dialogue and to working with my colleagues to move this thing over the finish line and to get gains that we haven't seen, because now the Speaker's talking about it, the Senate President's talking about it, and the Governor, who we all were with this morning in Woods Hole, is talking about it. And those are the folks we need in order to get this done.
David, thank you very, very much. That was very interesting, a lot of history. And Dylan, you're on now.
Hi, can you guys hear me? It's on?
I can.
Okay, all right. Well, I'm Dylan Fernandez. It's good to be with everyone. I represent Falmouth, West Falmouth, Woods Hole. This is my district right here, and then I have the islands as well. This has long been an issue that the three of us have all been passionate about. Sandy laid out the bill in a fabulous way, and David filled in a lot of the other points, so I really have nothing to say, and I'll pass it to Sue. No, I'm joking. Look, you mentioned telling your story with childcare. Well, I don't have children, but selfishly, I really want this because I want to have kids, and it's incredibly expensive for them to have them, along with the other profound costs of people living on the Cape and Islands. And so for us to pay for childcare, I saw that was $21,000 a year was kind of the minimum or the baseline or the average. And the median wage in my district is $78,000. So that's roughly around 30% of your wage just going to childcare. And we're one of the few states, well, actually there's more than a few states, but we're one of the states in the country that childcare actually costs more than public higher ed, which is crazy. Because you think about, I think about my parents who started saving for my college when I was born. You don't really have that runway like you do with public higher ed that you do with having a kid. And so what happens is that one parent stays home, usually a woman. It's a gender equity issue. And then that also impacts our workforce, which is another huge thing down here on the Cape and Islands when it comes to economic advancement, and it comes to the biggest issue that employers talk about in terms of not being able to have enough people here. And so this is something that was exposed during the pandemic as an even bigger issue, but as David mentioned, it's been festering for a very, very, very long time. And Sue's the sponsor of the bill, so I'll let her talk a little bit more about it. But I think this is, if we just zoom out a little bit, this is a bigger picture about a profound crisis in affordability that we have right now in our country, but 10x here on the Cape and Islands. When it costs this much for childcare, and then you put on top of that the median home price in Falmouth is around $700,000 to $800,000 on the islands. It's well over in the millions. And then you put $20,000 a year in childcare on top of a mortgage payment that is already over for most people my age. Our mortgage payments are at least half of our salary, if not more. So like, where does the rest of them? The economics does not work. It's just completely impossible to raise kids and own a home on the Cape and Islands. I don't think I could do it. That's not the only reason I don't have children right now, but I really don't think I could make it work. I just don't know how that I would. And I know friends of mine who do have children here are really, really struggling. I see my friend Nora, who just sat down. And our generation here, you know, there's a lot of us like me and Nora and others who we graduated, we went out, we left town for a little while, and now we love this place so much that we came back and we wanted to establish a family here because this is our hometown. This is the most beautiful place on earth. But unless we're giving millennials, the next generation coming up, the tools to be able to make a living here, we're just going to keep seeing unenrollment drop off precipitously. We're going to keep seeing our communities be completely eroded, and there's going to be a shell of themselves. And we can look like, you know, I represent the islands. So we see a trend here. Like, we know what the future looks like if this doesn't happen. And so it starts with Nantucket, goes to Martha's Vineyard, then comes to Falmouth in terms of affordability. Well, on Nantucket, you know, the average home price is over $2 million. There's no open slots at all on both islands right now. Even if you want to get childcare, there's no slots available for childcare. So, you know, even if you can afford it, it's not there. And so if we're not making, like, that is our future, because that's how this is how that, you know, Nantucket's the bellwether, and then we head there. So unless we're making investments now at the state level, and by the way, like, I think we're gonna do this bill personally. We just legalized betting. We just legalized sports betting in Massachusetts. I would put Sandy is not pleased. I would put a bet on this happening. Like, the stars are really aligning in the Senate, the House, and our new governor in making this happen this session. So I feel really bullish on this. I feel really positive about it. But then we also, like, it's really important this community is also showing up for issues around affordable housing projects in Falmouth and supporting affordability in a million other ways. This is a state issue, but a lot of the housing, a lot of the you know, bread and butter affordable stuff, most of that is controlled at the local level in terms of zoning and in terms of pushing back around narratives around NIMBYism. So that's just a pledge to, you know, this is really important. I feel really confident about it, but we have a whole lot more work to do around affordability on a number of issues.
But we're going to do affordable housing in the second half.
All
So that's okay. That's okay. We're running a little bit late, but Senator Moran, you're up now, and this is your bill. We may have another bill we'll talk about that's your bill also, but this is your bill. So we'd like to hear
Thank
what you
you,
want to say.
Judy. Thank you so much for being here. It's so warm to see you all in this room and to have the whole team here just really talking with the community about some fundamentally huge things that are going on. And this bill, which has been really terrifically described by kind of the partner in the effort, Sandy Feynman Silva has been from the beginning just a lead advocate, and there are lead advocates all across the state. So I'm betting with Dylan on this one. No pressure on myself here, but you know, I want to really drive this home. This bill is like the movie says, it's a box of chocolates. It really is comprehensive. I went to school, I got a scholarship and majored at Tufts in mental health and psych, and went to work as a child care worker. I worked for 5 years at various levels, including addictions treatment, and then decided to go to law school, sort of the opposite side. And during my first year of law school, while all my friends were, were bringing their children to work in mental health work and the, sort of earthy, crunchy kind of cool things, I was in this kind of business line. But in my first year of law school, my mom agreed to take care of the baby, which was Jolene. I was, I think, the first person at Suffolk University Law School to have breast milk in the cafeteria refrigerator. There were a lot of, kind of hurdles. It was not a child-friendly choice at the time. And, when as time went on and I went into mostly litigation, I eventually had 2 more children. My grandmother moved in with us, both my grandparents initially, so we sort of jockeyed childcare. My husband traveled as part of his job. So it was up to me, working 60 hours a week, 3 kids, juggling childcare. How do you go to the dentist, the pediatrician, all of the sort of balancing stuff that goes on. And now, kind of fast forward, COVID hits, and so many women on their career paths, the world is frozen. Maybe if they do have older family members helping out, there's now a health danger, health risk that sort of has to be accommodated as well. And when I remember thinking, when the kids were little, one of the toughest things was if the teacher would say, you'd open up the lunchbox from the day before and switch over, for Shannon, I had to draw a sailboat on her sandwich, and you're trying to go through all this stuff in the morning before the bus comes. And just that whole, the teacher wants a carton of milk. You see the note, and it's kind of like, open the fridge, dump the milk out, put the, okay, now I got to remember. It's that whole thing that parents do. And at this point in time, how do you afford, as Dylan was talking about, to actually buy a home? The cost of childcare is right now hurting the housing industry because it's one or the other. You can either pay for childcare or housing. And that's part of this box of chocolates. It's going to put money into helping families so that they can afford the American dream, to afford a home. It's going to help owners of child care businesses. As a lawyer, I still, after 30 years, represent a very large child care business owned by a woman who 20-something years ago came and was very upset. She had mortgaged her home. She thought she was going to lose her home because of issues with the business. And we were able to work some things out, and to this day, she's just stuck with me. And so I learned the child care business from inside, and the pressures of trying to pay staff enough so they're making a working wage, of trying to help staff who wanted to stay in the business get more credits in their education so that they can rise in the level of their chosen career. Because what's happening right now, there's a great exodus. It's hard to find workers in many, many places, but it's a Hobson's choice. Do I keep a career that I love and co-workers that I really get so much intrinsically from, or do I give it up because I can't even afford my own child's child care? So where does this leave us? First of all, I appreciate the optimism. I also am I have a lot of optimism that the bill will pass. But the other thing that we're looking at right now is Judy Hirschfeld-Bartek just did a terrific show that I think is going to be on FCTV later. Okay, about women's health care and abortion, and the fact that this, sort of changes in the rights that I grew up with and the rights that my daughters might have grown up with, and now my granddaughters, everything is completely changed. And it's something that gives a lot of families concerns. But it also has a really important effect in the economy. So we've talked about already, women are choosing to stay home because of the cost of childcare. Just on the Cape, we have had 9% of family childcare and 6% of early education centers have permanently closed since the beginning of the pandemic. And so what does that mean? I think that, as some folks have said, there just are no spots. So you have no options about even making these choices of staying on your career paths. There are some things that as we move towards this omnibus bill, we have secured $250 million for Commonwealth Cares for the stabilization grants that David was mentioning earlier. And the governor has included nearly $1.5 billion, that's a B, for the Department of Early Education and Care in her budget proposal, $475 million of which will go towards maintaining this C3 program. It's going to take commitment, but if we invest in our children's health and well-being, we will build a better Massachusetts and a better United States moving forward. In order to sort of help that bridge, I represent 8 towns, 4 on this side of the bridge, 4 on the others, so I was able to secure $170,000 to split between Plymouth and Cape Cod Chambers of Commerce to establish a program to help women get back in and to stay in the workforce, because still a lot of times it's more often the men who are able to stay and work, get higher pay. We in fact, I don't know if the two of you might have been there, I don't remember, but we have an equal pay bill that we still are moving forward so that people know when they apply for a job what's the pay going to be, because historically women undervalue themselves. And so that's something that we're also working for at the State House. The last point I want to make is that with Judy's segue, this is good for housing affordability, because young families will be able to, if they're helped with their child care, they'll be able to save to afford a home. Thank you.
I thank everybody. This has been very interesting because it was about the bill, but it was also about your own personal feelings of things and your own personal experience. And I think it was very, very educational to all of us. So let's have another round of applause here. Now, we are running a little bit late. We're going to have a Q&A session right now. It's going to be only on Common Start, because after that, we're going to move into housing, which obviously is an important issue also. So you're back there. Mary DiMucci, who is a member of the Legislative Committee, is there. We do it, so if you want to ask a question, please raise your hand. Then she will come to you. Please speak into the microphone, because if you don't do that, then the people who are televising this will have a big problem, and nobody will know what you said. So please raise your hand and
Sure.
let Mary get to you. Thank
Hi.
you.
Thank you so much. This was really informative, and Sandy, you did a great job of reviewing the bill. So my question is, the bill's been around for a while. I think this is the second or the third legislative session that Second, okay, that you've tried to get the bill through, and there's a lot of traction on it right now, and I can't believe that anybody in this room would be against such a bill. What do you see as the barriers within the legislature to get this bill passed? Like, what do you need to get it done?
Sure.
I mean, so it's a product of a number of things. One is, there's 8,000 bills filed each session, roughly, and everyone thinks that their bill they filed is the best idea. And so traditionally, it actually takes around 4 sessions for something to get passed. I'm actually really bullish that even in 2 sessions, we're going to see something here, just because the amount of momentum behind it. I still think it's incredibly helpful for everyone to be lending their voices behind it. Like, we should be optimistic about it, but then also really working towards it. Now Sandy's, along with the Common Start Coalition and Sue, and we're all supporting, is really pushing for on advocacy days. This comes after we passed the largest education bill in over 20 years in the Student Opportunity Act. And so we are funding education at the highest level ever right now, and the governor in her latest budget fully funds the Student Opportunity Act. So this, I think, is just the next step, the next kind of shoot-a-fall, if you will, in that process of really holistically funding our education system. And that's what it comes down to. It also comes down to funding. Like, this is going to cost a lot of money, too. So where do we get that money? The ARPA funds were historic. Those have to be spent down during a certain period of time. So now we have the millionaire's tax, right, which is specifically earmarked for transportation and education. That could be earmarked specifically for this, but we're probably also going to need to work in some other funds as well.
And I would say the funding is really going to be the key here. And whether or not this particular bill, as a bill, passes, or it is sections within a budget, whether it's an outside section that codifies something within the law, and then the funding that goes to particularly targeted areas of what this whole package looks like. And then what we saw happen in the last term as well is sometimes the Education Committee will report out its own bill, so it's not something that had been filed already, by taking the pieces of bills that are in that committee and putting them together. One of the things, and Dylan just mentioned the fair share tax. So the fair share tax says that all of the new revenue must go to transportation and education. What it doesn't say is what has to happen with all of the pre-existing revenue in the budget. And this is something that myself and folks in my party and some members of the Democratic Party fought when the question came through the legislature. Was we wanted language that said you need to have a baseline of what you're spending today in education and today in transportation. And if we get the new tax, that has to be in addition to. That's not the constitutional amendment that exists. The constitutional amendment that exists says all of that money has to go to those arenas. And so we need to be very vigilant that there isn't a move in the legislature, in either chamber, to shift some of the priorities of the existing revenue that we have and backfill it with the new tax. Now, when we get to the new revenue, education, we've got early education and care, we got Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and we got the Department of Higher Education. And their board, I can't remember what the number was, but they just voted on their ask. They were like, oh, we better hop in quick. So BOH has already got their proposal out. Administration has their proposal, which does fully fund the Student Opportunity Act. And glad to see that that initiative is being carried through, because we had to make some compromises over the timeline on the Student Opportunity Act to be able to fund it. So in my mind, the real challenge here is going to be the funding and to what time horizon can we fund all of these initiatives. And in my mind, when I mentioned pathways earlier, and we talk about the careers, I think we can creatively use some of the existing funding and some of those existing programs to meet some of these initiatives without having to throw a separate pool there. We say part of what we're doing in these programs should include this arena, and that will get us a little further to that goal as we try to seek the funding.
Just to finish that one little point, what to do. So I view this as an economic development bill. If this bill passes, in addition to what my colleagues have said, we are going to have more people in the workforce paying taxes. In the future, we are going to have more taxpayers. So, and the League is a premier organization which is supporting this bill. So if the leagues across Massachusetts talk to all of their representatives and senators, be sure you are on the bill. Send an email, write a letter, make a phone call. That's just practically speaking on the what to do. Oh, sure. Keep passing.
Thank you. Thank you. I just wanted to make one comment. And research shows, there's substantial research that investments in early education and care more than pay for themselves in the long run in the life of the children that are served. There's decreased dropouts, high school dropouts. There's decreased involvement in the criminal legal system among children who have early education and care. They're more productive. They graduate from high school more at a higher rate. And as was mentioned, they earn more, substantially more income and pay taxes. And also about the millionaire's tax, I think implicit in the bill was that this was going to be new money. It's just how things can get twisted so quickly. So we have to be, as voting citizens, we have to make sure that the legislature is accountable and that money does become new funding for transportation and education.
I just want to say one thing. I think we will do one more question on Common Start, and then we will move on to affordable housing. I think this lady here has had her hand up for a while.
Yeah, I've got the microphone, and I'd like to make first a comment and then a question. My comment is, I've followed early education now for over 30 years, and I'm very disappointed to see that the question of funding early education is still a special program, it is still a grant program, it is still an add-on, and you still need to talk people into it. Chances are you're looking at the choir. There's no one here who needs to be convinced of its importance. The people who need to be convinced of its importance are the people preventing it. We know how to provide it. It's with public schooling, freely accessible to everybody, and it would begin with K nursery school. So it would be N, K for 3-year-olds, K for 4-year-olds, part of the school district funding, absolutely guaranteed. And as Vera has pointed, Representative Vera, I'm sorry, has pointed out, we now have the space for it because we have so mismanaged ourselves. So we should use that space for this good thing, and then they will have a foothold, and later we will have to build to hold them. That would have been a better thing. So that's my comment. So I applaud you for still sticking with the good fight. It's like semi-hopeless, but this is great. And then my question is, so you say early childhood education is too expensive now. It costs us anywhere, I think the figures used now were $20,000 to $35,000 for parents a year. How in dollars for parents will the money you're talking about for Common Start actually pay out as you go to take your children for care in the year after this is passed? Where is that money going? It sounded like it was going to the current providers. What guarantee is there then that costs would be lowered to the parents, considering you're billing it as better for the parents, but it sounds really better for the pay scales of the early ed providers? I think they need it, but is that what you intended?
That's a piece of it. There's also a piece of it that actually subsidizes families. So the way it will start will be on the lowest income level. There'll be subsidies, and the hope is that as the program, within about 5 years, gets up and running, that no family would pay more than 7% of their income for childcare.
Currently, the Commonwealth goes through an exercise every, I believe it's 3 years, where we do what's called the market rate study, and it's by regions. And so our current reimbursement schedule, which again had traditionally been attendance, not enrollment, right, is done in this market rate study where the target of the subsidy, the target is 75% of the market rate. We usually do about 24% of the market rate. And so when we're talking about subsidizing the seat, which makes it affordable for the family, we're not there, right? We're not getting even close under the existing framework. And so the paradigm shifting in the framework is one big thing. The other big piece, I think, is looking at how do we make it so that the cost end of those providers is less. And one of the things that I was proud to help get into this Economic Review Commission report as a recommendation that we're pushing forward, and we've begun conversations with 2 organizations on the Cape, is to have these, what do they call them? They call them the shared services models, which is, let's say there are 20 childcare providers in Falmouth that are all going out to buy the materials, supplies for their centers. They're not able to do any bulk purchasing. They don't have enough money to buy a bunch of it up front anyways, right? So they're buying it as they go, and it's like just-in-time ordering because I'm not sure if I'm going to have enough money. And at least now I know I'm going to get paid if Johnny doesn't come on Friday. But before, if Johnny didn't come on Friday, I don't even know if I get that 24% of the market rate for that day of the week to be able to pay these bills. And so we're looking at whether the CFCEs, which are organized under the Early Education and Care, these are the family support organizations. We have one in Falmouth that organizes trainings and seminars and activities, whether or not they could be a shared services organization since they're already funded by the state. It's called Coalition for Children in Falmouth. Or if we go to something like the Cape Cod Collaborative, when you talk about public education, public access, well, we have a collaborative with all of the school districts. And so could the share services model, which would give us an even greater leverage to reduce cost if we went that far, even if it wasn't all of the school districts, if it was a number of them, a number of the communities that went to do that, to be able to cut the expense side of the ledger as we try to invest. The last one I want to say is, you're mentioning about the public piece. I don't know if anybody's familiar with the New Jersey experience, but in New Jersey, as they went through these decades of trying to make gains in early education and care, the coalition came together and sued the state under their state constitution as to whether or not there was a constitutional right to public early education and care. And they won. And so New Jersey has been going through a decade of trying to find the funding for the court-mandated implementation. I hope we get out in front of it so we don't end up with a lawsuit, because the lawyers have already been in Boston to talk about how our Constitution may have the same provisions that New Jersey had.
I don't have much to add. That's great. One slight note, just in our region, the Outer Cape, there are Outer Cape towns that offer subsidies, like the municipalities offer subsidies to families. I think it's $7,500 per child that Eastham, Truro, Wellfleet, a couple other towns do, and Falmouth doesn't, so maybe that's something that the town could also look into. Right? As far as I know, Falmouth doesn't.
Okay, did you have something, Sandy?
Just in response, I did file an article at town meeting a couple years ago that asking the town to create a $75,000 vouchers program for families to support early education and care. It did not pass. Just after my bill was discussed, there was a bill that did pass, which was to spend $200,000 to renovate the tennis court in Woods Hole. I just did want to also just mention, again, in terms of the funding, remember, I did talk about the operational funding and the family financial assistance funding. So there are would be two streams of support for the early education and care sector. Just to clarify, thanks.
Okay, I think we are going to move on, and I would like very much to introduce Liz Belcher. She is the Information Client Services Manager for the Housing Assistance Corporation, or what I think most of us know as HAC. And we're just delighted that you could come, and why don't you come up to the podium? Don't trip on anything on the way.
Hi, everybody. Thank you all so much for coming out. I love it when people come out to support things that are important. And it's amazing to me how much what I'm talking about and what we've just been talking about connect to each other completely. It's like a segue. Housing is also unaffordable. And people who work in the child care industry can't afford to rent homes or buy homes by a long shot here on the Cape. I'm with Housing Assistance Corporation. I've been with HAC for about 30 years. We're going to be celebrating our 50th next year. Right now, the program that I work in is called Intake, which is pretty self-explanatory. What our CEO calls us is the Housing Emergency Room, which is my favorite phrase of all time. Because what my team's responsible for is triage. People come to the door, they call, they email, I'm looking for housing, I don't know what to do. And what we've experienced, and I said I've been doing this for a long time, we're in the worst housing crisis I've ever seen. And I hate to come and make speeches and be doom and gloom, but it's the truth. It's very bad. And in most cases, when people come to us, we can offer you resources. We can offer you programs you can get on waiting lists for, but there's not the immediate, here's a house for rent down the street. That just doesn't exist. A lot of it has to do with affordability. The increase in rent amounts, especially in the past few years, has been staggering. We have households who make $70,000, $80,000 a year who are living in their cars. I'm not kidding. That has been an increase. It's been a very serious thing that's increased recently. A lot of people sold their rental properties during the pandemic. It was obviously a financial decision that a lot of people had to make because their tenants weren't able to pay their rent. We had a lot of programs that helped cover that, but some people did need to do that. And some people did it because it was a seller's market and it worked out for them. But the rental market on the Cape has always been very small amount of the available housing, and now it's gone from small to minuscule. So one of the things that we are advocating for as an agency and as human beings in general and residents of the Cape and Islands is more affordable housing, however it can be done. More affordable housing for people to buy, more affordable housing for people to rent. One of the things that we have advocated for a lot recently is the accessory dwelling unit program. Many towns on the Cape have recently passed accessory dwelling unit bylaws, which is wonderful. This allows, I'm sure most of you are familiar with it, but in case someone isn't, this allows for someone to build what they used to call an in-law apartment, either attached to their home, in their basement, in their side yard, which can be used as a rental. This is a way of increasing the availability of rentals in the area. And of course, the other thing that we advocate for is creating more affordable housing in whatever form we can. We have a development department. They speak to towns, they go through the permitting process to buy properties or to build new housing that is affordable or that is subsidized, which is income-based, so that more people that live here can afford to stay here. We have a very service-based economy. It does not pay well, which is why this segue. A lot of people that are my clients work in childcare. A lot of them are CNAs. Those two are very difficult jobs, and they don't pay as well as they should. And so the rents go up, people can't afford to live here. We lose all the workers that we need in order to keep our economy going. So basically, I'm just here to say, go to your town meeting, join our coalition at housingtoprotectcapecod.org, and find some way to advocate to help everybody by creating more affordable housing. I know we're short on time, so I won't talk any further. I'll sit down and give my esteemed legislators a chance. I've enjoyed listening to them talk all evening, so.
I don't want to rush you.
No, I believe me, I know there's a lot to be said, but I think they have some things to say too.
Well, thank you very, very much. I think that was kind of a warning of what we really have to be worrying about and thinking about. So now we go back to our legislators, and I'm going to start with Senator Moran now. Sue?
Thank you so much. As was said, it's so integrated, and when you talk about just the examples of childcare workers, CNAs, this community could not function without such important workers. And we simply must find a way to make sure that their housing is more affordable and that they make a living wage. That's kind of the big picture here. But I want to talk about sort of an omnibus bill that I filed. Prior to this legislative session, I had a regular housing meeting with folks all over the district, municipal folks, sort of hack folks, folks who worked with homeless people, also builders, which is not often done, just to kind of, get everyone in the same Zoom room together. And what I learned in just trying to get practical ideas for how we can move this forward as legislators, which is the really cool thing about my job now, since I've graduated from being a select person and county person, the consensus is that it's going to have to be sort of a mixed patchwork of solutions. And we're going to have to be reimagining our existing housing framework. We know that water treatment is a big piece of that puzzle, and so siting is also important. Some of the possible projects that have been proposed include converting unused properties and expanding the threshold for what defines units as affordable. We heard from municipal officials regarding increasing incentives, such as redeveloping brownfield sites. That's the level of creativity we need to be at right now. Super thankful for the support from the League members on my bill, Senate 895, which is, as Rep. Vieira reminded me, it's called an Act to Promote Sustainable Affordable Housing. It's an omnibus bill that makes 12 different fiscal and infrastructural policy changes to stimulate affordable housing development throughout this region. A couple of the provisions: it would give municipalities greater flexibility in approving mixed-use housing projects by updating the definition of consistent with local needs in the Chapter 40B process, as well as expanding eligible development for the 10% affordable housing threshold, so that would include senior housing and mobile homes. The bill would also grant municipalities a right of first refusal for affordable housing units. One of the things that I was grappling with last year were my towns coming to me to say, Governor Baker's mandate for creating additional housing zones doesn't fit in our community for X reason. For example, it's contaminated land is sort of the only place we could put it, or the cost of being a regional transportation partner has been too much for the town. We're going to have to figure out a way to give that up. So towns were so really stretched and concerned about their communities that they serve, that they were trying to find creative ways to get around the solution. And you probably heard Andrea Campbell, our Attorney General, has told certain towns you've got to find a way to really be in accordance with this mandate, or else. And that's her job, is to be sure that we've all got an oar in the water, and we are all recognizing where the crisis is. What I tried to do is meet municipalities where they are. These are hardworking, bright people who are just trying to solve a problem. And what they're running into is sort of community people call it NIMBYism. Other people, say, well, we're trying to be sure it's in accordance with the fabric of the community. It's opposition is opposition. And so what this legislation does is it tries to expand opportunities so that the community will not waste really so much time and money at this point in opposition. It's also going to require upgrades to septic systems, which we know are incredibly expensive, but I've got another piece of legislation that's helping that out. And it really looks out of the box from conventional financial services and programs, and looks at tasking DHCD with establishing an intergenerational housing pilot, subtracting student loan and child care payments from income requirements and affordable housing eligibility, and establishing couple tax credits to support seasonal workers and affordable housing contractors. So we spent really a year asking people what would work, how can we be more creative with having everyone in the room. Those are the things that we put in this omnibus bill. We also have pulled a few pieces out. I've got 7/1888, which is an act supporting workforce in affordable housing that would establish a tax credit capped at $10,000 for affordable housing contractors to deduct payments that they make to house their workers. So I went to the building trades. We know that we need contractors to build affordable housing. So I asked the Contractors Association, what is it, where are the barriers? What are the stumbling blocks here? And of course, like everything else, they said housing. They said, if at least I got some credit for what I'm paying to house my workers, that would make it a little bit, that would give me some breathing room. So we've filed that. Also filed Senate 1897, which is an act to support the seasonal workforce, and that bill would establish a similar $10,000 tax credit for employers of seasonal workers to deduct payments they make to house their workers. If we don't have workers for our summer economy, that hurts everyone year-round. And lastly, Senate 1898, an act to protect the affordable housing stock. This bill would create a tax on revenue generated from short-term rentals, which would exclude owner-occupied homes, and put the money into each town's affordable housing trust fund. So it's a puzzle that we're putting together so that we can really spur more communities to action. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Moran. I guess I called the bill a smorgasbord, and that's kind of what it is. And it sounds like it's one very well thought out. So thank you for filing it and for letting us know about it. Representative Vieira, will you continue?
Sure. I just want to say that our opening speaker in this segment, I call the 911 for my office, that when we end up with folks that are in those dire straits in a housing situation, depending on whether it's an individual that's homeless and I can lean on groups like Belonging to Each Other, which we founded here in Falmouth, or if it's a family that's looking for something, and we call Liz and we call Hack. And so Liz, thank you. Thank you for doing what you do. Because I don't know what I would do. I'd be sitting there like, who do I call now? And we know that one of the first calls we make is to Liz. And what Liz talked about, that website, what's it called again? HousingToProtectCapeCod.org. How many of you heard it on the radio? Have you heard those ads? A few of you have. What is that all about? That is about engaging in your local community, engaging with a town meeting like Falmouth. Still the only town to avail itself of the housing choices changes to zoning. We came to town meeting and created the overlay district that uses one of the 9, actually 2 of the 9 exemptions under this new law that said by majority vote, you'll be able to increase the density, the mixed-use development, and then we had a very smart amendment, I think, It was a little controversial at the time because it reduced the scope of where this zoning district would be. But Mr. Netto from East Falmouth said, hey, wait a minute, we're trying to clean up all the estuaries, and you're telling us we're going to build up to 22 units on an acre. How about we do that where we have the sewer? And as we continue to sewer, we can continue to expand that district, and/or we have good alternatives that we can capture the nitrogen from there. And so that did pass, which closed the district to the current sewer district in Falmouth. But lo and behold, don't you know, it was only, what, a few months after that a developer comes and says, hey, we've got a piece of land in your new zoning district that we think we can do 156 rental units. 25% at the market rate, and then a scaled rate above that. Oh, and by the way, we think because of the size of that location, we can do some open space, and we can do some streetscapes, and we can kind of change the look and the dynamic and bring 156 new units, 25% of which are going to be affordable. And now they're working with the town, and they're dealing with that wastewater issue because they need to connect to the sewer, and the pump station might not be big enough to pump it up the hill because we had great engineers decided to put our sewer plant at the highest point in town where we have to pump everything uphill. But anyways, so we're looking at that particular issue. But right now, the Falmouth Plaza is potentially going to be the first success story of being able to utilize the new tools that my colleagues helped us pass in the last session to be able to give that flexibility. But even for a majority, you got to show up. And that's what HAC is helping getting that word out, because you know every town on the Cape other than Falmouth and Barnstable is an open town meeting. I had a professor at American University used to say government is run by those who show up. Well, he meant like in the bureaucracy, those that are there all the time and engaged, in Congress, but literally in our Cape communities, it's by who shows up, because if you're a registered voter in town, you're the ones that vote. Falmouth, we have a representative town meeting, and they have a town council in Barnstable, so it's a little bit different. But engaging the communities to say, hey, you got to help with the tools. We talked about accessory dwellings. The accessory dwellings came up. Well, guess what? It's only a majority now to change that bylaw. We went through that, what, 3 times in Falmouth before we got it right? And I'm not even sure if we've got it right yet, but we got it on the books. But here we are now. We can do it by a majority. It doesn't take a 2/3. And so communities looking at the tools that they have. Redevelopment. I'm looking at Scott, who I see the face, and he's out there like, hey, what about this? What about this, right? You know, and he's identifying these locations in various communities that are just vacant, and who could step up. What do you need? You need some capital. You need a zoning change. You're like, what is it? Is it the other building on the same property? Okay, we need the accessory dwelling bylaw, and then you can do something with that property. But being able to do that, and I think what we as communities need to do is do comprehensive inventories. We don't have comprehensive inventories of these underutilized properties and town-owned properties. There's going to be a big controversy happening pretty soon here in East Falmouth, right, on the Emerald House property, where it's right at the school, it's in the water recharge zone, and they want to build affordable housing along with the community garden, which we're expanding because we had to remove it. Remove it from where? From Gifford Street, so we could build more affordable housing on Gifford Street, right? They did the corporation development up there. We had to close the garden down. We moved it to East Falmouth. Everybody's getting into it. We're fresh produce. Some of it's going over to the service center, so that's a great program. But now we're talking about coming in there and developing in that area more affordable housing. Well, I think I remember we were going to build the senior center in 2 different locations. Didn't build anything. We were potentially going to build the Mullen Hall School in a different location. We didn't build that. We have a fire station they just broke ground cutting trees this week. We had 2 other locations for the fire department. So why isn't there a comprehensive inventory of all of these properties where we were going to build senior centers and fire stations and elementary schools and start talking about what we need to build? Affordable housing.
David, thank you very, very much. And I think Dylan Fernandez will finish off this part of the discussion, and then we can do some Q&A. I don't know how much time we'll have, and at some point, I believe that FCTV may sign off, but we have to be out of here at least by 9, so we have a little bit more time. So Dylan, you're on.
Sure, thank you. I'll try to be brief on this topic because you can talk about housing on Cape Cod for a very long time. And I was just texting with the state senator who represents the Outer Cape, Charlotte, to follow up on your question. Actually, Provincetown as a town offers universal pre-K, and it's through their school system currently and fully paid for by the town. Of course, they have significantly fewer kids than we do. Yeah. So there's 3 main components to housing. First is, wastewater. How do you deal with on Cape Cod in particular, how do you deal with the wastewater? How do you build but also protect our natural resource here that brings, our visitors, drives our economy. And, through, the Cape delegation, we passed the Cape Water Protection Fund that's going to raise over $1 billion in the next 30 to 50 years to pay for sewering, other types of water infrastructure projects to lay the foundation for housing. Then the next component of housing is zoning. And in the legislature, we passed last session, maybe the session before, zoning legislation allowing for the towns to be able to rezone with just a majority rather than a 2/3 supermajority. The planning board's been doing some terrific work around taking advantage of that. So that's the other big part of housing. And then the third big part that we're all struggling with is capital, just funding housing. And so that comes from a lot of different places. It comes from the federal government. It comes from towns, like people talking about showing up. People need to show up on town meeting and not only demand that a portion of CPA funds are expended, but also just a portion of the budget is funded. Looking at Nantucket that I represent, they allocate sometimes 20 to 30 million per town meeting just in the budget to housing. It's a wealthy community, but they're also a third the size that we are. So there might be something comparable there. What I'm working on in the legislature around this is a real estate transfer fee on really high cost home sales. So what that means is anyone buying a home over $1 million, they would pay a really small fee that would go back to the local community, to their municipal affordable housing trust, to fund housing in that community. So for us, it's a 2% fee. So someone buying a $2 million home is just taxed 2% on the second $1 million. For a lot of people coming in, like really wealthy people coming in buying homes, this is like a rounding error, right? And their home buying process, and a lot of times it's like their second or third home here. And so and that's eroding our communities. So the least we can do is capture a tiny sliver of that money over a really high threshold so it's not impacting middle income families, and then use that money to fund these projects in our local communities. And by the way, you can then bond off of that money, make the dollars go a lot further. So I was the first person to file this in the legislature as a home rule petition in my first year in office. Since then, over 20 towns have filed their own home rule petitions across the state calling for the legislature to act on this. A lot of, at least 10 Cape and Island towns, if not more, have filed their own home rule petition asking for this. A lot of greater Boston communities, and then Boston the past couple of years has jumped on board and said we want to follow this too, and we want this as well. And now it's Michelle Wu's, one of hers, if not her top legislative priority that we've been in communications about. And so we have a statewide bill that we filed enabling any city or town, if they choose to opt into a program like this and impose a transfer fee. And that will raise the money needed to, it will do more than any other thing we could do to raise the money needed to fix our affordable housing crisis in terms of like the capital needed for it. So as an example, the islands actually already have transfer fees that go to a land bank. Nantucket's transfer fee last year raised $27 million in 1 year. Like, that's an insane amount of money. And so then if you bond off of that, that actually starts putting the dollars towards this that you need to fix the scale of the crisis that we have. So that's the big thing we're pushing. The governor was here today. She's vocalized support for a transfer fee. It's getting a lot of traction, and the state senate as well. And I'm pushing really hard with a group of people on the House side for this. So that's the thing I personally believe is the most important, and it attacks the thing that we haven't. That is kind of that third step in the housing process. The other thing I'll briefly mention is, as someone who recently bought a home, I could have used this as a first-time home buyer's savings account that's tax exempt up to a certain dollar amount. It's really, really hard as a first-time home buyer, to save up that 20% to put down. Oftentimes you can't. And so then you're paying mortgage insurance, which is profoundly frustrating to pay because mortgage insurance is literally just giving the bank money for like nothing in return, essentially. And you don't want to do that. So this just, it's a small piece, but it's a piece of the puzzle and making it easier for first-time home buyers to buy a home. David had a lot of good ideas. Sue has a lot of good ideas. This is such a profound crisis that there are so many different things. There's no silver bullet to this, and we really need a holistic approach when it comes to tackling this crisis. And if we don't, we're going to have a shell of a community.
I want to do a couple of thank yous myself, and then we have Q&A, and FTCV will be with us as long as they can. They may be on for a bit longer, and I hope they will be. FCTV, excuse me. I am getting tired myself. Okay, I just want to say, I want to thank Mary Tamucci, who is doing the Q&A, and she will be doing this Q&A also. And she also has been doing the audio for this program, getting that set up. Kerry Walton, who is also part of the legislative committee, she's been taking care of visual and some of the other things. And they've both been very helpful in planning and very helpful in tonight. And we have one other member, Margaret Cooper, who many of you may know. She's my predecessor and my mentor and my friend, and she couldn't come because she's home recuperating from a successful hip replacement surgery. So I just wanted to shout out for her. We're all wishing her well. Now, one other thing, we're 4 people running the legislative committee. If you like what we're doing, maybe you'll come and join us. If you don't like what we're doing and think we ought to be doing something else, maybe you'd come and join us too, but we would like to have some members. If you're in the league, then you know how to find me. Otherwise, just come up and see me when you leave. But I wanted to put in that little commercial. And now, Mary, you can go on with the Q&A, and we'll go as long as we can go.
Good evening, everyone. How you doing? So everyone here is like my heroes because you are in the trenches doing this work all the time, every day, and I don't know how you can work within systems. It's not my forte. My forte is sort of looking outside the systems at things that are happening. So I wanted to just throw out a few concepts that I've been talking about recently, and I have to excuse my voice. I've actually been cleaning basements and organizing, so I'm really affected by dust. So one of the things I wanted to say, I'm just going to throw out a bunch of concepts. One of them is, Dylan, you mentioned a little bit about, coming up with down payment. So I think within the existing framework of how we do things and what we work on, I tend to think of ways to push that out in things that maybe we haven't quite thought of. I know there's a lot of groups doing really great work with zoning and different buildings and such. So one thing people don't know is that sometimes if you can get put on title for a house, so let's say you know someone that's selling a house and they can add you to the title, you can then go to the bank, and if the house will appraise at the right value, you can buy it with no money down because it's technically a refinance at that point. So that's something I just figured out in the last year that I never heard before, never realized, and I've been able to do that. So that's just one thing to think about because the down payment is such a hard thing. Language is also, I think, everything with housing. So I've started using some different terms. I use the term attainable housing because I feel like it brings Republicans and Democrats and wealthy and folks without money all together because they realize attainable sounds like you're working hard, but it can still happen. So it tends to be something that people are not as averse to. Also, I think letting people know about 40A, it's something we don't talk about too often, but 40A allows people, if they have a apartment in their home or property that they've rented for 10 years or more, they can send a simple affidavit to the town, just one letter saying, just letting you know that this apartment's here and it should be stamped as a legal or two-family as opposed to a one-family. So that's a tool most people don't know. I think the ADA work is wonderful. I just think if we can get it more uniform across the Cape, you know, some towns are friendlier, easier than that. But we don't really have a housing problem per se, and I know people, you know, bristle when I say that, but we have an unused building problem, just like 128. If you look at 28, we have, you know, well over 1,500 empty buildings, and I notice every day the number of commercial buildings that are empty is going up really fast. It's increasing really fast, and these buildings I could see us putting showers in and letting one restaurant that is about to close because they can't get help rent one of these buildings and put folks in, even though it's not really laid out quite for it, but to be able to get summer help out of the kitchens, because as we know, over the last couple of years, people have been sleeping in the kitchens in the hot restaurants at night. A lot of people on Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard at Standard, like all the restaurants, I understand this is really sort of happening, those that haven't been able to get the housing. So other languages, I use the term applicants. I don't use the term homeless at all. Homeless has a whole different connotation, but applicants is a great term I think that folks can think of. I'm going to be pretty quick on this. I know I have a few things, but the other thing I wanted to mention is that by using these existing buildings, I think we're actually able to be much more green. I'd love to see organizations that are doing you know, housing that is affordable or attainable to really be doing it from the existing properties that are there. But I've said that if we work really hard together, we can take 10,000 more units within the next 5 to 10 years by doing condo conversion in some of these commercial buildings and doing a 1% cap so they don't appreciate and make them attainable. And really we can curb the fact that almost 70% of people are starting to live off Cape that work on Cape, and we can really start to change that. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. First, I'd like to say thank you to Senator Moran, Representatives Vera and Fernandez for their efforts in bringing housing to the rest of us. I'll say it like that. You stole my concept. Attainable housing. And I say attainable because when programs become available either through HAC or other entities, there are whole members of the community that are excluded because of AMI. You don't make enough to afford the homes, but then you make too much to be able to get into a lot of the programs. So as we continue to brainstorm and come up with ideas to provide housing for everyone, I think we should look at those type of aspects as well. I moved here 2 years ago with my family, and we've been in winter rentals since we've been here. We have to figure out what to do during the summers. And it's no fun. It really isn't. Fortunately for us, we have family that we can go to down south, but there are a lot of other families who are here that can't. So when we think about affordable/attainable housing, I think we tend to focus on low income, and there needs to be a shift in that mindset so that we don't just think it's the low-income people that can't get housing. There are other people too.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks to everyone. This has been really interesting throughout. And I appreciate all of the different angles that you're coming at to try to tackle this issue. One thing that I didn't hear, but I might have just missed it among all of the strategies mentioned, was talking about vacation home rentals and how to tackle that. I know that it's very appealing to buy a house down here if you have some extra money and then rent it out and make even more money. And that is surely a great idea for those people, but it does make it so that the market is really difficult for those of us who are trying to compete with those people who are looking for their second or third home to be able to rent out on short-term vacation rentals. And of course, it also makes it so that folks who want to be able to stay here year-round and just, even if it's just renting, that's not really an option either. So I was wondering if there were any angles that we could take on that relative to regulation around Airbnb or other like luxury rental systems.
Yeah, that's a great question, Nora. So there are a lot of communities throughout the country that have just said if you're going to do short-term rentals, some communities have just all out banned Airbnb altogether. Other communities have taken a different approach and said if you're going to do short-term rentals, it needs to be your primary residence, and we can't just have a system of private equity and people just looking to make, looking at Cape Cod not as a home, but just as an investment property and a business, and coming in and pricing out every single local person that would ever want to buy a home because they can't compete with someone who's just looking at buying a home as a business venture and then renting it out for 10 weeks out of the year. So there are a lot of things that communities can do. I'm not sure. I think there's been fight. This is going to be done at the municipal level, and Falmouth already has the power to do that if they so choose. To take it. It's a fight that's being played out across the state and the 351 cities and towns. In my district, it's come up on Nantucket. There's been articles being put forward at town meeting that gain a lot of interest because that's a place that a big portion of the island are just investment homes, and so that brings a lot of people out who make a lot of money off of that. So there's we need to get to a point where we start really standing up to moneyed interests and the profound amount of investors that are coming in here and buying the rest of us out. And we currently have the tools to do it. And I think it just takes political will on whether or not the town and the people in the town are ready to do that. I will say, as a new homeowner, I have to Airbnb my place out for like a few weeks of the year because I can't afford my mortgage, So I do think there is a space for people who own a home to be, as their primary residence, to be able to do that. If not, I might be in a tough situation. But a part of why my home price was so high and my mortgage is so unattainable in the first place is because I was competing with all of those people. So, we've allowed for a really perverse system to take hold here, and now we need to, use our power to get the reins back on it.
Are putting together a subcommittee to look at it because they're draining our rental market. I mean, it's just a problem, but they're actually breaking our zoning. They are running businesses in a residential district. That's not right, but we don't know where they are. So until we have an effective registration system for people who are doing this kind of thing, who are not owner occupied, part of the year, some that needs to be defined. So owner-occupied would be excluded from this, but they'd have to register, they would have to pay a fee, that would be a question. How big a fee? They would have to annually come down and re-register and let us know. They would need leases saying how long are they renting them for, so that we stop short-term rentals in residential districts. It is a business, and they don't belong there. Oh, sorry. Charlotte Harris? Oh, Charlotte Harris. I'm right now chair of the planning board. It's a 7-member board. All of us are concerned about it, and so is the select board. So I don't know that we're on top of it, but we're near it.
And I'm glad that you are, because renting your home on Cape Cod is a long time steeped in tradition. Most people's third job to be able to afford to live on the Cape has long been renting their property out, to the extent that they will move into a trailer or couch surf for a certain amount of time, so that, as Dylan said, they can afford to live here year-round. The other thing that it does is it allows our tourism economy to be healthy. And why do we need a healthy tourism economy? Because that brings in OPM, other people's money. That keeps our mill rate for the residential taxes lower than it would otherwise be. So it is a issue that needs balance, and I see the planning board's plan will provide us with that, so thank you.
But it's a complicated thing. The people that you talked about, they're one thing, and we don't want to harm them because they're very much a part of the fabric of our community. Well, the industry, VRBO, Airbnb, there are a number of them. You can't just Google Airbnb and think you counted everything that's available. You'll be nowhere near it. You really need a whole system to find them. And investors are putting together money now to buy whole strings of houses in entire neighborhoods. And then they rent out the whole neighborhood. They change the neighborhood. And that's happened closer to bigger resorts, big ski resorts, big coast. But we are actually a popular resort. And it will come here, and we need to stop it before it gets further out of hand.
I think this has really been a very, very good conversation on 2 issues. I thank the people in the audience. Do you have something?
Just
Sure.
one more thing. My name's Bob Miscali, and I'm Falmouth's representative on the Cape Cod Commission. And 2 of the issues that the commission has spent a lot of time looking at, and I urge you to look at their website, capecodcommission.org, is actually affordable housing and the regional housing strategy, and childcare. They've put a lot of time and effort into studying childcare, the 2 issues that we're here tonight. So I urge you, if you're looking for some information, to go to their website. There's a lot of good information there.
Thank you very, very much. I think we should have a round of applause for all of us, so let's do that.
Thank you.
Excuse me, I think I'm going to end it, and I think the televising is going to end, and then we have to be out of here fairly soon, but I'm going to end the meeting officially now. I want to say thank you to FCTV very much. I want to thank the Falmouth Enterprise for their publicity. I want to thank our 2 speakers who were very enlightening and got it started on both issues, and that was just wonderful. Our legislators, you've had a lot of different ideas and brought a lot of different information here, and I think that was excellent. Our audience, you've been attentive, and you've had a lot of interesting things to add, and I want to thank Mary, who has been doing the Q&A, and Carrie, who's did the visuals that we did and a lot of other things, and I'm going to just say good night.